You have been misled about medieval peasants. They were not helpless sufferers, freezing in crumbling huts. They were resourceful survivors who mastered the science of warmth long before the term existed. They could throw together life-saving shelters using simple materials that most modern people would overlook. One particular building method kept families alive through cold snaps that would shut down entire cities today. So why have we forgotten it? Winter was no joke in the Middle Ages. One blizzard could erase a household faster than you could light a candle. The cold was merciless. Temperatures plunged to levels that would make your modern complaints about a drafty room sound like luxury. And here was the grim reality. If your home was built poorly, you were practically digging your own grave. Every night became a fight against the creeping chill that seeped through cracks and corners. If the walls were weak, the cold would win every time. Peasant families lived season to season, counting their wealth not in coins, but in bundles of grain and stacks of firewood. When winter struck, there were no easy fixes. No store runs for blankets, no turning a dial to summon warmth. You faced the cold with what you had, and if that was not enough, survival was uncertain. Children and the elderly were the first warning signs. Their small bodies could not handle the cold as well as adults. Fingers turned pale, lips blue, coughs deepened into sickness. Even pressed close to a weak fire, their bodies struggled to stay alive. And the most dangerous threat of all came quietly. Drafts killed. A single hole in the roof or gap in the wall could drop the temperature inside by 20 degrees overnight. That difference could mean life or death. Imagine trying to sleep while your breath turns into frost clouds above your blanket. Small wonder that medieval people obsessed over how their homes were built. Poor shelter led to illness, and illness meant lost labor. If you could not work, you could not earn or gather food. No food meant no strength, and no strength meant death before spring. It was a brutal cycle that swept through villages year after year. Storms struck without mercy. A roof blown off on Tuesday could mean disaster by the weekend. Repairs had to be done immediately, often by the family themselves, in freezing rain or snow. Nature did not wait. Every villager understood a simple truth. Strong walls and a solid roof meant life. Anything less meant gambling with fate, and nature rarely lost. But recognizing the problem was only step one. The real challenge was finding the materials to build something sturdy when almost everything useful was scarce, taxed, or forbidden. Peasants could not stroll into a supply store. Their construction supplies came from the land itself. Wood from local forests, mud from riverbanks, straw from the harvest field. Every bit of nature had a purpose. Resource-rich villages thrived. Those lucky enough to live near forests had endless timber. Others, surrounded by open plains, had to ration every branch. Some communities enforced strict rules about cutting wood. Chop the wrong tree, and you could end up punished instead of sheltered. Stone was another favorite building material, though it came with its own problems. Moving heavy rocks without carts or cranes meant hours of sweat and labor. And while stone made walls strong, it also made homes cold unless insulated carefully. Peasants solved that by mixing stone with mud or lime plaster, which sealed in warmth surprisingly well. Then there were roofs. Thatched coverings were more than rustic decoration. They were lifelines. Families piled tons of straw into dense layers overhead, forming thick insulation that trapped warmth inside. Beneath those roofs, people could survive even the harshest snowstorms. The real secret weapons of medieval architecture were flexible woods like hazel and willow. These supple branches formed the framework of peasant homes. Builders wove them together into walls that could sway with the wind instead of snapping apart. Clever design from people who could not afford mistakes. Different regions produced their own distinct styles depending on local resources. Villages with red clay built warm-colored houses. Others used pale or yellow soil, giving their homes unique shades that reflected the land itself. Nothing went to waste. Grain stalks became insulation, reeds filled walls, and even animal manure helped bind materials together. Peasants reused everything because survival demanded it. The most impressive part of all is how effective these humble materials were. When arranged with skill, they created sturdy, heat-trapping shelters that could stand through decades of brutal winters. Medieval peasants were not just survivors, they were builders of warmth in a world that offered little mercy. Now we reach the clever building methods that turned simple materials into walls, strong enough to laugh at winter's worst storms. Medieval peasants may not have had fancy degrees, but they discovered something truly brilliant. Wattle and daub walls kept whole families alive when icy winds tried their hardest to finish them off. Wattle might sound like a complicated term, but it really means weaving. Imagine basket making, except instead of crafting something to hold apples, you are creating the very walls of your home. Builders took thin, flexible branches, usually hazel, willow, or whatever grew nearby, and wove them between upright stakes. Back and forth, over and under, they worked until the pattern formed a tight web that looked like an enormous outdoor mat. Every gap had to be filled, because open spaces meant drafts, and drafts meant death. Some villagers became so skilled at it that their walls looked decorative, but survival mattered more than style. Then came the daub, and this is where things took a fascinating turn. Daub was the medieval version of cement, made entirely from what nature provided. Clay was the foundation, strengthened with sand and reinforced with chopped straw. But here is the part that makes modern readers wrinkle their noses. They mixed in animal manure. Cow dung, horse droppings, pig waste, anything they could find went right into the mix. Disgusting? Definitely. Effective? Without question. The dung added texture, helped the mixture bond, and made it stick better than anything synthetic. Plus, it was free and available in every farming village. Once the mixture was ready, peasants spread it thickly across both sides of the wattle framework, pressing it deep into every gap. The daub seeped between the woven sticks, locking itself tightly into place. Layer by layer, they built up the walls until they were thick enough to stop the cold dead in its tracks. When the material dried, something amazing happened. The clay hardened, the straw added strength, and the entire wall became solid enough to resist even the harshest winds. These walls stood firm through storms that would send modern homeowners straight to their insurance company. The finished color of a house revealed a lot about the land beneath it. Yellow clay created golden walls, red soil turned homes a rusty hue, and chalky earth produced white ones. Whole villages often shared the same tones because everyone used clay from the same spot. Maintenance, however, was vital. Cracks appeared after freezing winters, and smart families repaired them quickly before the next storm season arrived. A well-kept wattle and daub wall could endure for decades, sheltering families for generations. Once the walls were handled, builders turned to the next critical task, creating a frame strong enough to hold everything together. If that foundation failed, the entire home would collapse. To solve this, medieval peasants used a design known as the cruck frame, and it was nothing short of genius. The cruck frame started with two huge curved oak beams, shaped like an upside-down letter U. These timbers were not easy to find. Peasants spent months searching the forest for trees that naturally grew with the right bend. Once they located a matching pair, they joined the tops to form a graceful arch that could support enormous weight. It was science in action, even if no one called it that yet. Each cruck pair became one section of the house's skeleton. Most homes needed 3 or 4 of these giant arches spaced evenly across the structure. The frames were connected with crossbeams and horizontal supports, locking everything together like a massive wooden puzzle strong enough to outlast any storm. Now here's the part that might surprise you. These homes were built using only simple hand tools: an axe, a sickle, and a spade. No saws with motors, no measuring tape, no metal nails. Everything was cut by hand, fitted by eye, and joined with wooden pegs or tied with hemp ropes. Makes modern home projects look easy, doesn't it? The construction process itself was astonishingly detailed. A single peasant house needed more than 200 poles of different shapes and sizes. Each piece had a clear purpose wall posts, races, roof supports, and beams all had to fit perfectly together. Builders used nearly 3 miles of twisted rope to hold everything in place. Speed mattered just as much as precision. The frame had to rise quickly before the weather turned bad. Villagers often worked together to lift and secure the frame in a single day. Miss that window, and your family could spend winter in a half-finished hut. The beauty of the cruck system was its flexibility as much as its strength. The wooden frames could bend slightly in fierce winds without breaking, unlike rigid stone walls that cracked under pressure. Properly treated oak beams could last for centuries, which explains why some medieval cruck houses still stand today. But even the strongest frame meant nothing without a good roof. That was the final challenge, creating a covering that would not leak, collapse, or blow away when winter storms returned. Once the walls could handle anything nature threw at them, the real battle began above. Medieval peasants knew one truth better than anyone. A bad roof was a death sentence. No one could afford that mistake. The best solution was thatch. Bundles of wheat straw were packed thick enough to block snow, rain, and freezing winds. Some roofs reached 1 or 2 feet deep, holding more than 1,500 pounds of straw. Imagine a small car resting on top of your home, except this car kept you alive through winter. Here is where medieval ingenuity really shines. These roofs were not thrown together carelessly. Builders made them at steep angles, usually more than 40 degrees, so that snow and water slid right off instead of soaking through. Peasants understood basic physics, even if they could not explain it. The building process was pure hard labor. Each straw bundle was laid in overlapping layers, starting from the bottom and working upward. Picture enormous fish scales made from stalks of grain. Thatched roofs were fastened with wooden pegs or twisted ropes made from straw, forming a tight surface that sent rain bouncing away as if it had struck solid wood. The most surprising part was how durable they were. A well-built thatched roof could last for 50 years or more with regular upkeep. Some families kept the same roof through several generations, a level of longevity that makes modern materials look weak. In timber-rich regions, some peasants used wooden shingles instead, split from oak or other hardwoods. These thin planks overlapped perfectly, creating watertight layers that worked just as well. The problem was that wood was tightly controlled by landlords. Cutting trees without permission could bring heavy fines, so getting enough timber sometimes meant navigating tricky local rules. The most unusual roofing material was turf, layers of grass and soil stacked over wooden supports. It might sound absurd, but turf was an amazing insulator. Northern villagers relied on it where timber and stone were scarce. Maintaining any kind of roof became a non-stop struggle against weather. After every storm, families climbed up to inspect for loose straw or cracked shingles. Even one small gap could let in moisture, leading to rot and collapse. What made these roofs truly impressive was how peasants created them with simple tools and materials gathered from their surroundings. But even the best roof would fail without insulation from below. The question then became what to do about the ground under their feet. Medieval peasants had no access to carpenters selling polished floors. Most families spent their entire lives walking on packed earth. Still, those dirt floors were smarter than they looked. Builders mixed ashes from their hearths with water, pounding the mixture into the ground until it hardened like stone. The ash acted like a primitive kind of concrete, sealing cracks that let in cold air. Some people added dried herbs or onion skins to repel insects and mice, though the smell probably took getting used to. If a family was lucky enough to have some savings, Wooden floors were the ultimate upgrade. They kept feet dry after rain and added a barrier between the household and the frozen ground beneath. The true heart of every medieval house, however, was the hearth. It was more than a cooking spot. It was the center of survival. During the long, dark months, everyone gathered around the fire for warmth, drying clothes, and even sleeping close enough to feel the heat, but far enough to stay safe. The cleverest families improved this system by heating stones in the fire and placing them along the edges of the floor before bed. These stones acted like primitive heaters, radiating warmth for hours after the flames went out. It is remarkable how much thought went into something as ordinary as a floor. Every decision mattered when a single cold night could prove deadly. Should they mix in more ash? Where should the hearthstones go? How thick should the herb layer be? These were not decoration choices. They were calculations for survival. Families with better means often built hearths out of stone. These absorbed heat during cooking and released it slowly through the night. It was a clever bit of natural engineering achieved with nothing more than nearby materials and manual tools. But all of this work needed to be done before the first frost arrived. Because once winter truly settled in, the smallest mistake could become fatal. That is why autumn was a season of frantic preparation. Every crack in the daub walls had to be sealed before the temperatures dropped. Those gaps were not just cold spots, they were potential death traps. Fresh daub became as precious as gold in the repair season. Families mixed new batches of clay, straw, and manure to patch every damaged section. The smell was foul, but the alternative was far worse. Even the tiniest hole could bring in a cold draft strong enough to kill a child during the night. Then came the whitewashing ritual that likely saved countless lives. Peasants did not apply lime wash for beauty or decoration. The white layer created a water-resistant shield that stopped dampness from turning walls into blocks of ice. Even better, the lime helped kill germs and insects, an unexpected health bonus in an age when survival already felt like a full-time job. Clever builders made sure roofs stretched well beyond the walls, sometimes as far as 2 or 3 feet. These wide overhangs worked like enormous umbrellas, shielding the daub walls from pounding rain and drifting snow. Without that protection, the walls would have collapsed faster than old bread left in the open. Yet necessity often sparked brilliant solutions. When official repairs could not keep up, families improvised with whatever they had. They stuffed worn clothing into cracks, piled straw against the outer walls, and even hung animal hides indoors, like homemade tapestries, to trap warm air. It is remarkable how inventive poor families became with almost nothing. Broken bits of pottery filled holes. Moss scraped from the woods acted as emergency filler. One home might use bits of wool, another dried reeds or grass. Anything that kept out the killing wind was worth trying. Timing was critical. Wait too long and the daub would not dry before the freeze. Wet daub during winter could split apart when trapped water turned to ice. Rush the work and the patches might crumble as soon as the first snowstorm hit. Women often led these weatherproofing efforts, while men labored in the fields. They had an uncanny eye for trouble spots. A patch of darker daub or a slight bulge in a wall could mean danger ahead. All this feverish activity took place while families were also salting meat, storing grain, and cutting firewood for months of near total seclusion. But even the most carefully sealed cottage meant little without a helping community. Survival during a medieval winter depended on unity. No one lasted long alone. They might try, but spring would find their frozen body as proof of the failure. Medieval villagers understood something most people forget today. One person's safety depended on everyone else's. As October winds howled, entire communities turned into well-organized survival groups. Families pooled their labor and shared what they had, fixing every house before the deep cold arrived. Here's how the system worked. Village elders arranged what they called building bees. 20 or 30 people gathered at one house to repair walls, reinforce roofs, and add insulation. The family receiving help provided simple food such as thin broth and old bread, while everyone brought their own tools. It was practical teamwork. One household might own a sturdy axe, another the best plane for smoothing wood. The real genius came from resource control. Villages set firm rules on who could harvest reeds, cut trees, or dig clay from common land. These were not friendly suggestions, but laws of survival. Take more than your share, and others might conveniently forget you when your own roof began leaking in January. Knowledge passed naturally in these gatherings. Young men learned to weave wattle from their fathers and uncles. Girls watched their mothers mix perfect daub, memorizing the balance between clay, straw, and dung. Skilled builders shared tips refined over generations, like the right way to angle thatch bundles or how to bend fresh timber without splitting it. Villages also had protection systems for those least able to fend for themselves. Elderly widows, the sick, and families with new babies always received early assistance. The strongest workers reinforced their walls first and made sure their hearths were well sealed. Cold weather always claimed the weakest first, and a community that let its elders freeze lost decades of experience in surviving the cold. Even tool sharing followed unwritten rules everyone respected. The village might own only a few good hammers, a single saw, and a handful of sharp chisels. These tools rotated from one household to another as the repairs moved along. Lose or damage someone's hammer, and you were expected to replace it before spring arrived. This system was not based on kindness, but on logic. Every solid home improved the odds for everyone else. A community with strong roofs, concealed walls, stood a far better chance of seeing the next thaw. When winter meant life or death, cooperation was the only way to survive.